Canada's major cities like Vancouver and Toronto currently feel a little bit real estate bubbly, let's be honest. But the contrasts between Saskatoon's more stable and affordable market are dramatically different. While Toronto and Vancouver have seen prices nearly double over the past decade, Saskatoon's maintained a steady climb, and today we'll share why Saskatchewan's unique position might just be a safe haven for investors and homeowners today. Stay tuned, and of course, if you're thinking of a move to Saskatoon, send me an email. My info's in the description below. 52% of Canada's population is either located in British Columbia or Ontario. If you include Quebec in that metric, you'll find close to 75% of Canada's population in those three provinces, which leaves all of the rest of the Canadian provinces to fight for votes, but also to make an impact, which is why it's really exciting to see, in spite of population, how much of an impact we make here in Saskatchewan. If you look at debt loads for the average Canadian and the average Canadian income, the average price in Saskatoon 10 years ago was about $330,000, whereas today it's about $380,000. Vancouver 10 years ago was $600,000, and today it's $1.16 million. Toronto had a very similar effect, but when we compare the incomes of the average Canadian to the debt load based on those house prices in Saskatoon, it's about 6 times the average income for the mortgage amount, whereas if you look at in Vancouver, it's about 24 times the average income, and in Toronto, it's 20 times the average income for that mortgage amount based on those prices. The GDP, gross domestic product, per capita is highest in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which really speaks to the job opportunities in our province here, as well as immigration in Saskatchewan. We have express entry programs where newcomers to Canada don't even necessarily need a job offer in order to move to our beautiful country, as well as the Saskatchewan Immigration Nominee Program has a faster processing time than any other province in Canada. And if you've watched the market at all in Canada over the last number of years, you will have seen foreign buyer taxes, empty house taxes, stricter mortgage qualification rules that have been implemented to the country at large. Whereas in Saskatchewan, although we have been subject to those changes, it hasn't necessarily been a requirement as for what our market does here locally compared to the rest of the country. When things are going up in those other areas, we might have a steady decline. When things are going down, we're actually climbing, which is what we're seeing right now. And the interesting thing about those changes to policies is that yes, it might affect demand, but it doesn't affect supply. And stricter mortgage qualifications, albeit, are trying to increase affordability, although it actually does the counter effect when you stop and look at it. Rent prices all across Canada have gone up significantly in recent months. However, if you look at what was typically offered for a one-bedroom suite in Saskatoon was averaging around $1,000, whereas when you look at Vancouver, it's around $2,500 for a one-bedroom, and likewise in Toronto, about $2,300. And I'd like to question what type of unit and what quality of unit you get for those rent prices. There is a lot fewer bidding wars in Saskatoon. Yes, when the market heats up, you will see property between $300,000 and $500,000 get a lot more activity, and maybe about 1% of the listings that are currently on the market are actually set up for a presentation of offers, in spite of how short we are for supply of inventory and how active the market is right now. For investors, we get people all across the country and all over the world wanting to buy real estate in Saskatoon because of its very attractive cash flow properties. It's a much safer bet when you can buy a property with 20% down and still have positive cash flow, so that you're not only banking on the speculative ups and downs of the pricing in the market in order to turn a profit. An interesting dynamic I've noticed recently since the increase in interest rates is the fact that there are a number of local investors with larger portfolios of 50 to 300 rental units who used to have enough positive cash flow to live with their full-time income based on that portfolio. However, now, as those mortgages are coming up for for renewal, the money that they used to have as a supplementary increase of what was left over for their regular living expenses is now getting eaten up by those interest rates and the increases upon mortgage renewal, which presents an opportunity for people that see Saskatoon as an attractive investment spot, because investors from out of province simply see the return on investment and compare it to what they have locally, and they are scooping up properties in the hundreds of units at a time. It's also very notable that Saskatoon and Saskatchewan in general have very landlord-friendly tenancy rules as compared to almost every single other province in Canada. I've heard a number of nightmare stories from Ontario, Atlantic Canada, and BC as well. We have very affordable inner city rentals in the west side of Saskatoon, and if you go to the east side of Saskatoon, you will find a higher quality tenant profile in what we consider university rentals here in Saskatoon. We also have very affordable commercial investment opportunities where you can buy real estate and a business anywhere from $1 million to 1.5, or even cheaper depending on what location you're looking. Construction quality is often a concern in these other markets like Vancouver and Toronto when the prices are going absolutely crazy and everything is selling, whereas in Saskatoon, even some of the biggest builders need to be very, very cautious with how they go about their building practices, because here in Saskatoon, it's really just a big, small town, and word gets around fast if their reputation for that particular builder is not strong. So the fly-by-night builders simply don't make it in our market over the long haul. First-time home buyers, you'd be surprised how many times I get phone calls from young professionals that currently live in Vancouver or Toronto that can't afford to buy a house locally. So as a first-time buyer, they're purchasing rental properties in Saskatoon. Saskatoon incomes can actually support the mortgages that we have here in Saskatchewan. A $300,000 mortgage in Saskatoon would run you around $1,750 based on today's interest rates, whereas a $1 million mortgage in Toronto or Vancouver would run you about $5,850. For seniors in Saskatchewan, as compared to what you might see otherwise, I've heard stories of seniors who bought their property in Vancouver or Toronto for a very affordable price, around $100,000, maybe $150,000 or less decades ago when they originally purchased. But as prices have accumulated over time, when those properties get reassessed and are now worth $1.2 million, they now can't afford the tax bill. And even if the property's paid off, I've heard stories that these same homeowners have had to take a reverse mortgage on their property and start eating away at their home equity just to cover the property taxes. In Saskatoon, we have a lot of options for seniors. For apartment condos right now with elevators, there are 80 options for sale. Those properties are ranging anywhere from $140,000 for a downtown one-bedroom unit all the way up to $2 million for a top-floor, brand-new 2,000 square foot penthouse overlooking the river. There's also a very unique opportunity to buy a bungalow-style condo townhouse in Saskatoon. Matter of fact, there was about 70 of those that sold in the past year, ranging anywhere from $155,000 for a coach home-style bungalow all the way up to $1.2 million or $1.8 million in the Willows neighborhood for those bare land condo units that are backing onto the golf course, and those units were built around early 2000s. If you are a family and you are needing more space for properties in Saskatoon with square footage around 1,600 square feet to 2,000 square feet, now granted, we're not including the basement square footage here in Saskatchewan with those statistics, that's only above grade square footage, there are single family house options ranging anywhere from $189,000 all the way up to $1.1 million, and right now there's 126 options listed for sale, and the yards are bigger too. If you were to ask me what your property in Saskatoon was worth prior to the pandemic, I would have been able to tell you without even looking at market comparables, because prices hadn't really changed very largely over the extended course of my career prior to the pandemic. pandemic. As we'd mentioned, 10 years ago, the average price was $330, where today the average price is somewhere around $380 in Saskatoon. However, most of that inflation has happened since the pandemic, and although if you were to track what happened, things dropped a little bit as everybody was scared originally when the pandemic hit, but then things started to climb right there shortly after because there was a whole bunch of pent-up demand, and it continued on and on throughout because of the money and the inflation and the COVID effect that happened almost everywhere. However, we didn't see a very large increase in prices here in Saskatoon compared to other market centers where you would have generally seen 40% increases in prices from pre-pandemic till 2022 before rate hikes. Saskatoon only experienced about 13%. Then, when interest rates went up, prices dropped very slightly, and of course they still are dropping in many other areas. Until about this year now, 2023 and into 2024, it's been balanced in terms of prices, not enough inventory, but this year, 2024, we've seen prices climb significantly, which I call a little bit of the Calgary effect, although we're catching the latter end of it because, in my opinion, people are already now getting priced out of Calgary. It's becoming almost as expensive as many of these other major urban areas in Canada. If you look at the migration patterns from one province or one city to the next, people are always screaming for affordability. And right when the pandemic hit and prices started to climb, we saw people move from Toronto to almost every single other smaller community in Ontario where prices jumped up significantly. We saw that happen in every single area across the country. We saw Atlantic Canada, who had hardly seen any appreciation for a large number of years, go up dramatically in prices, and people were moving to those areas because of how attractive they were in terms of having a place to live at an affordable rate when it was very easy to work from home following the pandemic. We were also seeing that happen across the prairie provinces and in the major cities across the prairies, where, as I'd mentioned, Calgary was the hotspot that saw the majority of the most recent migration patterns. However, there's only 3 major cities left in Canada that are still largely affordable, be Edmonton, which is a big city, over 1 million people, Saskatoon, which I find is probably the most beautiful city of these 3 I'd mentioned here, and then Regina, which is actually the most affordable of those 3 cities right now in Canada. Believe it or not, Saskatchewan was actually leading the country in terms of growth in GDP at 5.7% in recent years. Saskatchewan is a very stable market because of the multiple different resource sectors that we have here in the province, including potash, uranium, oil, and agriculture. Saskatchewan has actually been the world's largest exporter of canola, lentils, wheat, dry peas, oats, and mustard seed. Saskatchewan is the world's second largest global producer of uranium. Saskatchewan boasts the world's largest potash reserves, and we are currently the second largest producer of oil in Canada, of course, next to Alberta. International investment in Canada is dropping at record rates. However, in Saskatchewan, we have strategic trade deals with China for agriculture, mining, and potash and uranium, India for pulse and agri-foods, Japan for agriculture and technology, United States for energy and manufacturing, Ukraine for agricultural equipment, Kazakhstan for mining and equipment, and the European Union for renewable energy and other trade. If you look at population growth from cities all across the country, you will see that Calgary is number 1 right now at 1.75% population growth, but right next to that is Saskatoon at 1.62%. If you look at other cities, Halifax is about 0.65, Toronto's at 0.93, Winnipeg is at 0.98, and Montreal is at 0.73%. If we take a closer look at Saskatoon's market overall, you'd notice that there's 184 properties listed right now that are brand new product, which stands to test about 4 months supply of new product on the market right now, new construction. 70% of that product, by the way, is between $400,000 and $600,000. For single family homes right now, we have about 470 listings ranging from $100,000 all the way up to $3.3 million. Of those 470, 120 are conditionally sold, and the sweet spot in Saskatoon, as I'd mentioned, is about $250,000 to $500,000, where half of that product listed right now is actually conditionally sold. 500 to 750 moves a little bit slower. There's about 2.5 months supply of product in that range. 750 to $1 million is a little bit of a sweet spot for that higher end product. There's about 4 months supply of product for that right now. And then over $1 million, there's 21 listings, and there's about a 7-month supply of product above $1 million. For condos and townhomes, there's about 230 listings right now, 74 of which are conditionally sold, which is nice that they're finally starting to move. Condos had previously been sitting on the market for a long time. Right now, there's about a 1.6 month supply of condos on the market. And for those that are listed, there's about 41 bedroom units, 130 2-bedroom units, and 50 3-bedroom units listed. And those are ranging across all price ranges. To give you an idea of which locations will garner which price ranges, if you look at the east side, there's close to 300 single family listings, and only 3 of those are under $200,000. On the west side of the river, not including the north end, there are 45 single family listings under $200,000. And on the west side, to give you another idea, there are only 7 single family listings right now above $600,000 on the west side. So most of the upper end product is on the east side, and then the north end is a little bit of a niche product because there's not as many options there, but it is very attractive. Right now in the north end, the cheapest single family home is about $224,000. There's only 30 listings right now in the north end, but 70% of them are over $400,000, to give you a bit of an idea. For most of the upper end product in Saskatoon, over $750,000, you will find those products typically in Willow Grove, Varsity View, Rosewood, Nutana, Evergreen, and Aspen Ridge. There are other hotspots to mention as well, although there's less product available typically, and there's less options available typically in Lawson Heights, River Heights, and the Willows. Notable mention, there was 25 acreages close to Saskatoon that sold over $1 million in the past year, and there was 45 condos that sold above $1 million in Saskatoon. Now, 20 of those were apartment condos and the rest were bungalows at the Willows. Now, some people will point at the crime rate in Saskatoon per capita and say that it's higher than other areas in Canada. But if you go to the highest crime rates per capita to the lowest, you will notice that it's the lowest populations to the highest populations per province or per city, which to me says that yes, the highest number of crimes happen in the big cities, of course. So if you were to go to the downtown inner city core in those big cities, you are much more likely to find trouble than you would if you were to go to the downtown city, inner city core in any of these smaller areas. However, I would argue that really you can find trouble no matter who you are or no matter where you are if you actually go looking for it. And I will say that living in Saskatoon, it is a relatively safe community, and it's really just a big small town. Saskatoon is a quick and easy 15-minute drive commute to almost anywhere in the city, which also makes it a city that's big enough but not too big. I hope you found some value. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, if you're thinking of a move to Saskatoon, send me an email. My info's in the description below. And otherwise, I will see you on this video next. Have a fantastic day.